Hello, everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm an associate at the Global Compact Network Canada, known as the GCNC. I wanted to thank you for tuning in to GCNC's Spotlight Series, featuring Samantha Mesrobian from Scotiabank. Great. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the GCNC to those who are unfamiliar with our organization. We will then go through our main discussion with Samantha, and we'll talk about why Scotiabank created an index to better understand the challenges facing young people using health and education indicators. We'll then finish off with a Q&A period. So, the Global Compact Network Canada, if you don't already know, is a Canadian network chapter of the United Nations Global Compact. The GCNC offers the Canadian business and non-business sectors a unique opportunity to learn and exchange best practices in corporate responsibility. In doing so, we build the capacity of the Canadian corporate sector, empowering companies to embrace the 17 Sustainable Development Goals within our national and global operations. Now for some housekeeping. Please, as a reminder, keep your cell phone mute. It is distracting for both the listener and the speaker, so please be mindful. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or write them to the chat box. Please send these questions to Julie Foster. You can privately message her your question, and we will address them at the end of the section. Today, we are lucky to have Samantha, who is the Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at Scotiabank. Samantha has been with Scotiabank for 10 years, and in her role, she is responsible for leading the CSR strategy, reporting, stakeholder engagement, and communications. Samantha will be leading the session, and now I'm going to give it to her to share her screen and lead the session.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully it'll work.
Great, and I just stopped mine, so it should, yeah.
Okay, great.
Perfect, I can see your screen. Awesome.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Samantha Mesrobian, and as Julie said, I'm the Director of CSR at Scotiabank. There's two things that I wanted to talk to you about today. One is a new Scotiabank Young People in the Community Index. We call it the YPC Index. That we created. So one, we want to talk about why we created that, but most importantly, we want to talk about why it's important to share it so that more people use it. So just to give you a little bit of context on Scotiabank, for those of you who are not familiar with the bank, we are the third largest financial institution in Canada with more than 23 million customers in over 55 countries around the world. Where we're particularly active is obviously in Canada, but in Latin America and the Caribbean regions. So I want to give you a couple of minutes on context setting so you understand where our focus on young people fits within the overall CSR strategy. So as you can see from this chart, we have our core business purpose is in the middle circle. It's why we bank, and that is that we believe every customer deserves to become better off. And we have 5 commitment areas that are in red with the icons that you can see, and within those 5, we have 7 priority areas. So if you look under community on the very left-hand side of the circle, our priority is investing in young people. And the reason that we are focused on young people is because they represent our future, and not just Scotiabank's future, but our future collectively. They're our inventors, our entrepreneurs, our educators, our community leaders, our next corporate executives. And if we really, really want to have an impact, positive impact on future generations, it doesn't matter how much you or I or other companies do individually, we really need to work together to address the challenges that youth are facing today. So that also leads to why we created this index that we want people to share. This is the other part that's important to our strategy, and that I think is also important to everyone. That young people, if you invest in the health and education of young people, you're going to help them achieve employment and provide economic opportunity to them, which leads to financial citizenship, which creates a growing economy. It's a value chain that is repetitive, and it's really critical that all those pieces are functioning, and we believe that investing in health and education of young people is foundational to all of that. Just also to point out that I already mentioned that our bank's purpose is that we believe every customer has the right to become better off. And the other point too, I know this is very similar for a lot of organizations, we have a deep community heritage and have been focused on the well-being of our communities for over 185 years. It's very important to us to invest in our community, and we have shifted our focus to young people so that we can have impact not only today but on tomorrow. Just a couple of points on this page, just to give you context. We framed our health and education focus into what we call guardrails. And so this helps us align all of our programs and our funding decisions under these 4 guardrails, basically. And so all of our sports programs and sponsorships and philanthropy activities are under Live Healthy, and those are probably the most visible to you here in Canada are the thousands of hockey teams that we sponsor. And staying healthy is a little bit different, but also very similar under health and well-being. Access to education, again, I mean, these are very obvious guardrails, so I'm not going to actually read out all the things that are on this page because I think it's pretty self-evident. And I think that the other challenge that we all face in terms of education for young people is not just educating them for today, but it's educating them and providing skills on what will be the jobs of the future. And I think that in this age of technology and innovation and AI, that is really critical as we move forward. Okay, so this is a picture of the index report, just so that you can visually remember what it looks like when you go on our website. So the report is based on our belief that the foundation for young people is health and education in terms of their success and well-being. So in order to better understand the challenges facing young people in these 2 areas, Scotiabank, in partnership with an advisory council of 10 leading international experts in the youth space, and GlobeScan, a global consultancy, created the index, which we call it the YPC Index, Scotiabank Young People in the Community Index. And the goal of the index is to give a snapshot of how young people are faring across multiple countries. So selfishly, because this is based on, this was for Scotiabank initially, we based it on countries predominantly where we operate. So there are no statistics within this index for youth issues in Africa, for example. It's very focused on North, South, Central America, and the Caribbean. What we wanted to do is highlight areas that are lagging and where policies and social investments are needed. And with the index, we can pinpoint examples of progress where certain countries are faring better than others in key areas of youth well-being. And so we can look at those countries that are doing better for best practices. We recognize each country has and will continue to have its own unique set of challenges. That also means for NGOs and for corporations that are looking for funding programs that one size fits all programs are not necessarily the most effective solution. We hope that the index can help all of us in our efforts to impact the future of young people. Oops. Sorry guys, I don't know why my screen stopped sharing. There we go.
This is Alex from the GCNC. Samantha, if you would like me to show your presentation, I can do that for you. Or would you like to try one more time to see if yours can share?
Why don't you go ahead? We're on page 5. Sorry about that.
No worries. Well, technology is one of those things that we will work with. So.
And I don't know why it stopped sharing. Sorry, everyone on the line.
Just bear with us for one moment. We're just uploading it right now. And you said you're on slide 5, correct?
Slide 5, yeah.
Okay. Just
Actually, you can move to the next slide with the map, slide 6.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Could you see it, Julie? Not yet? Okay. Can you see now?
Sorry, everyone.
I'm just going to try one more time here. There seems to be a system.
There you go.
Great. Perfect.
Thank you.
Current slide. Great. So we're back on
Thank
track.
God for backup plans.
Yes. Great job, Samantha. Keep going.
Sorry, everyone. Okay, so I just wanted to give you context. I just mentioned that our focus is on Canada and the Americas and the Caribbean region. So you can see here where we focus on those 30 countries. So if you go to the following page, please. We have, this is just a highlight of the indicators. So the index, the index is based on health and well-being and education indicators. So there's 19 so far, and they've been derived from publicly available, reliable, and valid data sets. So for example, when I say that, I mean data source from WHO, UNESCO, Institute for Statistics, UNICEF, World Bank, global organizations that have trustworthy data and reliable data. They cover a diversity of health and education challenges, such as youth pregnancy rates, dropout rates, things like that. And some indicators within our index are a composite of related data inputs. So under nutrition, for example, it would include obesity, stunting, underweight, things like those. So according to our advisory council, the 19 indicators we landed on are representative of the challenges faced by youth and communities. And if we can show progress in these areas, it would mean improvement in the quality of life for youth in those communities. I am going to talk to you about some of the gaps that we have in data. So I'll do that next. If you can go to the next slide. So these are some of the constraints that I talked about. They had to be youth-specific, which is a challenge, because some data has a total adult or a very broad age range, but it's not youth-specific. It needed to be related to health, well-being, and education. And also, it needed to be from publicly available and reliable sources. So there's a lot of data that's available on our next point, but not necessarily on a regular basis. So our statistic may be published every 5 or more years, and we were really looking for statistics that are published preferably on an annual basis, and if needed on a biannual basis. So it's really hard to get some of that information, and then also we wanted the data to be available for most of the markets, Scotiabank's markets across the Americas. So those became our data constraints, and in that process we found that there was a real lack of available data on youth in many countries across the Americas, and definitions of health, well-being, and education varied considerably from country to country. You would think that that would be something that was quite consistent, and it was not. And so because of the gaps in data available, some of those indicators that we have in our index are serving as proxies to indicate the level of health and education. So for example, we looked at alcohol and tobacco consumption as a proxy. If you go to the next page, please. Julie, can you turn the page? Okay, so while we're waiting for the next page to turn to, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit further about that lack of consistent youth data. And so when we get there, we're going to talk about the fact that there's consistent data lacking on mental health, prevalence of child abuse, trafficking, training of educators, access to transportation and technology, health or nutrition education. This is a long list. Physical activity levels, access to green spaces, sanitation and water sources, and all of those are viewed by our advisory council as really important indicators of youth development, but we don't have consistent data on those. Ultimately, our hope is that the index will highlight the need to improve the measurement and monitoring of the well-being of youth. And so we hope that organizations that actually do capture that data will report it on a more holistic or regular basis. So Julie, if you could please advance to slide 10.
So, Samantha, slide 10 is lack of consistent youth data in key areas. Would you like to move to the next one?
You can move to, yes, keep going.
To how we use the how to use the index?
No, you can say lack of consistent youth data. You can go to that page.
Okay, great. That's the previous one.
You need to go forward.
Sorry about this. We'll just...
We're seeing the movement, but the presenter doesn't seem to be.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, this is very true.
So I'm going to go to lack of consistent data, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to share with you, so Jean-Francois Perrault, he is our chief economist, and he's very engaged in what we're doing around youth. And so I just wanted to share a quote with you about this. That the reality is that there's far less data on these issues than we thought. And that's kind of a scary thing when you look at some of the data sources that are available, that you can't actually define issues around young people as well as you would like to. And so if you recall the gaps in the data that I was referring to previously, then those are things that we can address hopefully together. Okay, now you can go to how to use the index.
Perfect. We're on the same page.
We're on the same page now?
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is just a bit of a snapshot of some of the things that you can find by looking at the data in the index. And we also have separated some information for 10 specific countries. So there's a bit of a mini snapshot within the index report that you can read about on the health and education indicators, or there is a data table, and I'll tell you where all these resources are at the end and give you some links. But there is a data table that you can actually sort by country, or you can sort by indicator, however you want to look at that data. But by looking at each country separately across those indicators, those looking to help, like governments or nonprofit organizations or youth practitioners and private organizations, can take actions that target areas that actually need additional support. So it really gives you a factual context for the areas that are challenging for youth people. So I'll just give you a little bit of a snapshot on some of the results of the index. So overall, countries such as Barbados, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Jamaica, they generally have lower than average scores on health and well-being, while young people from the U.S., Costa Rica, Uruguay, and Canada enjoy far higher scores on most health and well-being indicators. However, there's a fair bit of difference in the indicators across countries on things like nutrition. So for example, Guatemala, Guyana, Bolivia, and Belize have some of the lowest scores, and they're far behind countries such as Jamaica. Within education, countries such as Guatemala, Grenada, Suriname, Guyana, Venezuela, and St. Lucia appear to fall behind the regional average on most educational indicators. And those are countries where more support may be needed for young people. An area of discrepancy is what we're calling digital connectedness. where countries such as Cuba, Belize, and Guyana are lagging far behind the regional average. Digital connectedness is also an indicator where low scores are prevalent in both small and large economies, such as, for example, Honduras versus Mexico, and Mexico. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So the index, as I mentioned earlier, we have an advisory council of 10 leading youth experts, internationally based. So we have a very good representation from across the Americas and the Caribbean. And I just wanted to share with you a few things about their thoughts on how to use the index, because it's really important for us to be able to share this information so that other people will actually use it to help drive change. Sorry, so this first quote basically talks about the index allows us to see where we stand. I don't know if you can click down on a PDF. Yep, there we go. The next quote from another advisory council representative is obviously it's helpful in identifying gaps. And in identifying those gaps, it also helps you identify who's got best practices, and maybe there are programs that we could model in one country and transfer to another. And then the third comment from our advisory council is that it helps us look at the long-term progress on key indicators. So Scotiabank is we're very realistic in our view that we cannot make an impact on some of these indicators on our own. We cannot change some of these really big issues in some of our countries. But if we can collaborate together, which is, also part of number 17 SDG, it's collaboration and partnerships. If we can provide this tool that will help drive some of the partnerships, then we think that that is a huge win for the young people in our communities. Okay, you can go to the next slide. This is our aspirations for the index. And I think I've already really talked about that. I mean, we really want people to use this index. We want them to use the data to help them define what their program focus is in the countries where it's really going to benefit the most. We also are hoping that it will highlight the importance of youth and communities, and not just from Scotiabank's perspective, but really from all of our perspectives, that if we really want to invest in the future, we have to be serious about how we're investing in young people in our communities. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. You can actually click 4 times, so they're all up there. There you go. These are the different reports that are available. Everything is on our website, scotiabank.com/CSR. So there is a full report, which is the image that I showed you previously. There's also a white paper if you just really want an overview piece. Sorry for my coughing. There's also a methodology report, and of course I talked about the raw data tables being on our website. All of those are accessible. They're all publicly available. And we hope that they will help us understand the true state of young people, because it's the only way that governments and organizations are going to make a meaningful and positive impact. We have to collaborate better on these issues in order to make bigger impact faster. All of those reports are also free to download if you're interested, but I would encourage us to work together to refine our approach to solving society's issues, so that we can create a future in which everyone can become better off. So my last slide is a thank you, and it just has a couple of links so that you can remember those. The first link is actually for our community page on our website, which talks to you about our young people in the community strategy in detail. And then everything that I've spoken to you about for the index is on the Scotiabank.com CSR site. Most of those you will see them at the bottom of the homepage, but there's an easier navigation at the top. It's called the Downloads tab, and then it'll take you to all the reports that we have available on our website. Well, I know that that was a very quick overview, but I really actually wanted to open it up for a conversation. I'd love to know if other people within this call are dealing with or trying to deal with youth issues or looking for ways to better navigate funding decisions, or are faced with, 20 different requests for funding and it's hard to navigate, where you can make the most impact. I think that if we look at the SDGs, where we're trying to make an impact is on the health and education numbers, whatever you want to call them, areas, sorry. And I think that those topics are too broad. So I think that having an index allows us to really narrow down how we can make an impact on young people and hopefully have an impact on our future generations. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for any questions.
Great, thanks so much, Samantha. We're actually just monitoring the chat box now, so if you have any questions, feel free to. Oh, okay, we actually have a question here. It is from Meg French, and the question is, how do you find young people, and specifically, what would be the age group for that?
Excellent question. So earlier I talked to you about how the definition of certain indicators varied country to country. And so we cast a very broad net on our definition of young people. So it's basically anyone who's a university student or younger, so 24-ish. Because we did that because the issues facing young people from one country to another are going to vary vastly. So in some countries, they really need to solve issues at a very young age, so preschool to grade 1 or 2. And other countries, they've got a great foundation for that kind of resource, but where they fall off is when kids get to high school.
Okay, great. Feel free to use the chat box if you guys have any questions. I had a question for you, Samantha, specifically when it comes to creating these partnerships. If you could give an example of kind of the ideal partnership that you would want to come out of this index tool.
I don't think it's a partnership necessarily. Well, I could say we would consider a partnership where we could collectively solve on one issue. And we do that, actually. If you look at our partnership with Canadian Tire, we're both avid hockey supporters in the youth space, and so we partnered together with Project North. Those are the kinds of things where you can have a bigger impact if you work together, where you have something in common. So we would consider doing partnerships again like that, particularly if we were trying to solve for a specific issue in a specific country. So. And as I said, not all programs are one size fits all, and so you can't necessarily look for a partner that's a global partner. You need to look at what the issues are that you're trying to solve.
Okay, great. Like you said before, it's not a one size fits all, so it really depends on the person. We actually have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just refer. Oh, we have a couple coming up now. Great. Let me just look at the chat here. Okay, so, great question. We have, just to go in order, from Dr. Needney, how do you plan to take this learning from this regional experience to benefit the global youth agenda, specifically in the context of SDG goals and targets, planning, and implementation?
That's an excellent question. And I think that's where the phase that we're at now is how do we take this out more broadly so that more people know about it and we can influence some of those decisions and those conversations. So we just launched this index in the summer, and we're trying to build the right opportunities to share with the right groups. So obviously I would welcome any suggestions that you have if you wanted to send me a note separately.
Great, you guys can co-create on that. We have another question from Joe Sully. Where do you receive the most interest since the index was launched, and would that be from government, business, NGOs?
I think it's a little bit mixed right now. So far, the most interest seems to be coming from the NGOs because they are the ones who are trying to influence funding to programs. They're also the ones who are trying to influence policy makers. So they play a key role in all this, so they seem to be the most interested so far.
Okay, great. We also have a question from Adrian. Specifically, their company would like to collaborate with nonprofits interested in providing youth education regarding renewable energy. Could this index be a tool for that?
Currently, there's no indicator on specific areas of education in the index, so I don't know that it would be helpful. It would be helpful in terms of where there may be educational gaps between levels of school, university versus high school, but it doesn't get into specifics of the types of education, and that's because there's no available data that breaks it down like that.
Okay, great. Now we have a question from Sarah. So, how are you going to use the index to influence your requirements for your charity partners?
So part of our launch in June was actually with our own charity partners, because we really wanted them to understand our focus and our desire to focus on young people in the community. We have been already asking them to relook at their program proposals in this area even before we launched the index. And we're hoping that the index will also serve as a reminder to both of us, so we can both look at those data indicators and look for the areas that need the most support, so that we can work together on that versus someone's pet project, for example.
Okay, great. And we have one last question here in the chat box from Laura, and she says, thanks for the presentation, and do you track, monitor, and evaluate good practices using the index, and if so, how?
No, I don't think we would be able to measure necessarily good practices using the data because of the databases that we're pulling from. What we are going to be doing is measuring those databases on a regular basis. So right now, even though we just launched it, we're actually looking to see if there are data for some of those missing indicators that have recently been made public. We're also going to look at, on a regular basis, if the indicators, if there's progress or decline in areas of the indicator. That's the great thing. We should be able to measure both progress and decline in the areas of education and health. So we're hoping that because of that, we can shift everyone collectively to not lose sight of some of these key issues.
Okay, great. Now I'm just going to share my screen one more time now. If you guys can, actually I can just kind of promote it now. I just wanted to, while we come up with kind of the last remaining questions, I just wanted to promote that we at the GCNC have a couple webinars coming up. We have one on anti-corruption in Africa on November 19th. We have our quarterly network call, our last one for the year, on November 30th. And then our last regional anti-corruption series on Eastern Europe. So if you guys can look out for those dates. I think those are all the questions for today. So so I'm going to wrap up, and we can share the webinar details from the speaker, because I know we've had some requests on individuals who would like to speak to you, Samantha, so I'll share those separately. Thank you very much for sharing in the chat box.
Perfect.
And we actually do have one more question before we kind of wrap up, and I think this will be the time, if you have questions, to get them in now. But the question is from Kimberly, and she's just wondering if Scotiabank is tracking in any way progress related to girls, adolescents, and women.
That's a great question. So because of the data that we are collecting, we are able to segment that data between males and females. So, and actually, if you read the report on some of our country highlight pages, we've actually done a little snapshot of the differences between girls and boys on that. So where the data is available that we can separate for girls, we do, and we can do that even further. So if you look at the report, there'll be a few highlights, and then obviously if you look at the data table, you could probably find some other ways to split the data.
Okay, great. So there's definitely a way to splice that. So Kimberly, if you want to look into it, you can look at the splice data. We actually have one more question. Julie, if you want to unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, Samantha. I just had one quick question. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the amount of time and resources it took to put together this index report. It sounds very interesting, and I'm looking forward to looking through it, and was just wondering how much time it took to be able to put together such a comprehensive piece of data.
That's a great question. It took a long time. The challenge, I think, so first of all, we got together an advisory council. So because we are not necessarily experts in the youth space, we are very passionate at Scotiabank about young people, but that doesn't make us experts on what the issues are. So we really wanted to have an expert panel to help guide us and make the right decisions in terms of what data points we should be including. So that took a while in of itself to make sure that we had a good balance between health and education experts and a good regional balance so that we weren't speaking to one country or another in particular, that we had a balanced regional perspective. So then it took a long time to go through the data that was available and try to understand what we could and could not include. So I would tell you that it was probably a year in the making by the time we actually published the report. But clearly we don't anticipate to spend that much time going forward in terms of updating the data points in the index. We hope that that won't take a year and shouldn't. But we also now have this great advisory council that we can tap into for other things because they are truly experts in the youth space. So it's great to have them on side.
Great. It sounds like you have a great team of knowledgeable experts together, and who knows what will come next. Speaking of which, speaking of the advisory council, Adrian actually had a question regarding to open up and expand further on the advisory council to cover any technical insights on technology.
I'm sorry, you kept...
sorry. Yeah, I can rephrase the question.
Yep.
Could you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead and ask the question.
Yeah. Is Scotiabank open to expand further its advisory council to cover a technical insight on technology?
I think that we would be open to considering that. It's obviously not a closed group.
Yeah.
We would be open to looking at other members, but again, I think that the membership needs to be representative of all the issues, and so we've tried to do that. And so we all know that technology has been playing a more increasing role in all of our lives, but particularly in the youth space. So we do have some members that bring that technology expertise, but would certainly be open to having further conversation.
Okay, great, great. And she says thank you, and now I'm going to follow up on that and say thank you to Samantha and everyone listening for participating. The webinar recording will be live, and for those of you who've reached out to me, I will ensure that we exchange contact information with Samantha. Thanks so much, guys. We're going to wrap it up, and I will look forward to the next webinar with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.